Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Alberto Nunez and Brad Loomis as we talk about what the hell to do with your bodybuilding off-season. Many people find it quite easy to determine how to get someone shredded, right? You do the best you can to lose body fat while maintaining muscle. But what to do afterwards or between those dieting seasons is what people really struggle with. Like, how do you make sure you get the most out of your hard work? What are some strategies and practices that you can use to ensure that all of your food and training are being accounted for? In short, how do you invest in your off season rather than spending your time just spinning your wheels, gaining too much fat, or keeping calories so limited that you're unable to actually make the proverbial gains? That is what we chat about here for the next hour and a half, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. So here it is, off-season programming with Brad Loomis and Alberto Nunez. So let's pretend, the person that we're talking about, the imaginary human, either just finished season, their last show of the season, and they want to compete again in like 2 to however many, at least 2, I'll say at least 2 years, yeah? And then, or they've never competed, they've been weight training a while, and they know, like, within the next 5 years, I'd like to step on stage for the first time. Although, those are 2 different people, huh? We should probably talk about those separately. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so let's start with a newish person. If someone wants to compete, again, like, within 5 years, they've been weight training for, I don't know, like in an intelligent manner for like 6 months to a year, and they want to plan ahead. Brad, what's the conversation that you would kind of have with them? What are some things that you would ask them? What are things that you need to know besides that timeline?
Well, basically what you just said, how long have you been training? What does your training look like? Maybe get a little bit more into the particulars of, what their long-term plan is. Are we talking 2 years to get up on stage? Are we talking 3 years? Are we talking 4 years, etc. And then probably, start delving into what we should do nutritionally. You know what I mean? Because obviously they're probably dedicated in the gym and getting their training done. But, to get, especially a person that's only, really got a structured training age of like a half to 1 year, there's some newbie gains to be made there. And so oftentimes, what do they want to do? They want to cut. They want to diet down. They want to see abs, Yeah. Probably I'd be talking them out of that. I'd be, look, let's think about newbie gains here. Let's think about, caloric surplus and what maintenance would be. And then probably just get them going and then kind of revisit every chunk of time, based on what their big plan is. I think that's how I would set up their game plan.
And their division too, right? Because like if you have a bikini athlete, or I think that's probably the only division in which, like, if you've only been training for maybe less than like 5 years, you could actually get on stage and do really well. Would y'all agree or no? Because like even male physique,
maybe.
Yeah, even less. Because if they've been honestly, if they've been like body pumping and boot camping their ass off, they could have enough structure for that division, if I'm thinking about it. But let's say anyone else.
Reluctant to pick a division too soon, though, to be honest with you. Because
especially for
we don't really know what they look like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of gals that I've seen that are like, gosh, I really want to do bikini because it seems like it's an easy way to break in.
Yeah.
And then once they start getting a little bit of muscle on them, we're like, you've got really good structure. You should start thinking about something a little bit more physique oriented, like figure.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also seen the exact opposite, where it's like, sometimes girls can sometimes be kind of tomboys and they want to do bodybuilding or figure, and they don't really have the structure for it. So we're kind of thinking, well, maybe we probably better, do one of the other classes. So I don't know, I'm kind of more, I don't know, I guess I'm just kind of more of a big pre-planning guy,
Okay.
and let's not get too committed in which division. Let's just get going on training and setting you up for success, and then you'll be successful regardless of division.
Right. Okay. switching over to males, Bert, like how, just to like lead off the whole rest of the conversation, if you did have someone training 6 months to a year, they know they want to compete on stage, how long would you advise most males who want to, because even physique needs quite a bit of size, right? Before they do their first show, if they have the patience. Because we have to say too, like, we know a lot of the people that we're talking to, like you said, they want to get on stage like now. But in a perfect world, if they were open to whatever you suggested, what's like a typical recommendation in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I think the first few months of training, you're going to kind of know where you stand. Like,
right.
Are you a Smiley Elmore Jr. or not? Like Smiley, for those of you guys who don't know, like I've said this before, but I'm pretty sure by the time he was like 16 and like weight training for football, like he had more muscle on him than I'll ever have. Like,
well, and like even Jeff, right, when he was 17.
Yeah, you'll know right away. So you make quite a bit of progress, but still the amount of progress after your first year that you can make year to year, it's noticeable. You can show up on the scale for sure. So, you're kind of cheating yourself out of that, I think, if you get in there prior to like having 3 years of just concurrently running some sort of progressive resistance training program along with a high protein diet that hopefully is not like dieting, right? Time spent, in the midst of fat loss.
Right.
So you have that. And then I think the other thing here is I wish it were more like this. Not everyone thinks about it this way, but when you decide that you want to compete, you got to understand that it is a very subjective sport. And I think before you get out there and you compete, when I say compete and have my hands up, kind of tongue-in-cheek about this one, because, it's subjective. Like if you want to beat someone, like go play basketball, go powerlift, go do something like that. It's based on people's opinions. So I think you need to do this firstly for a while. For yourself, and you need to kind of just appreciate the way you look, and not need someone to tell you you're second place good, you're fourth place good. So you need that, and I think that along with just being able to live the lifestyle for a certain amount of time, I think is super important. By the time I decided to commit to my first show, or when I was kind of thinking about doing so, I had done this long enough to the point where I wouldn't have had to have made too many drastic changes to my life, because I was kind of doing it. I was training 4 days a week, 5 days a week. I was eating protein every 3 to 4 hours, that sort of stuff that, to other people it sounds like way too much time. At that point, it had become my life. It had become my culture. So development reasons, and I think you need to learn to do this for yourself for a minute. And then finally, again, we talked about this in the Sacrifice to Win podcast, like developing the coping skills as a physique athlete. I think that's important. And I think it's, even if it's bikini and you have this awesome structure and you're just made for that division, like I can totally see a situation where someone jumps in there, their first 6-7 months into training, and basically they don't know how to bodybuild without the stage, or how they feel about their physique is really dependent on their last placing. First 3 years I think they're super important when it comes to just developing those really, really basic skills that should be part of the process, whether you're competing or not.
Right. Damn, that was good, dude. Great couple minutes there. I think too, what's important to note, I guess, if we're talking about this person versus the other person, which we'll get to, is that there's a lot less up and down, right? Like when we talk about, which I'm excited to hear you talk about because of all your presentations I've heard you do on this, Bert, like the ways that you manipulate body weight throughout an extended off season strategically, versus like someone who's new. There's probably not going to be a lot of, say, mini cuts, a lot of ups and downs. Not even a lot, but if any, like you said, it's the first 3 years. There's no need really for that shit. In my opinion, do y'all think anything different, or is that something that y'all would agree with?
Well, maybe even I think maybe mini cuts wouldn't be a bad idea, because it kind of Like, I remember my first fat loss diet or my first few attempts, like, they sucked. Like, I was
But that
in
would
it
be
for-
more like as practice, not as physique development. Whereas later on,
Exactly.
it's
As
actually Whereas later on down the road, it's actually an assessment tool. I guess we can just talk about it, right? Okay, so we know that someone who's new, going to be competing in 5 years, will handle different than the person we're going to talk about. For the rest of this, which I think is what's more confusing to most people, is I just say we could even use me as an avatar. Like, I competed in 2013. I won't compete in another 2 to 5 years, let's say. We won't actually talk about me, but a lot of people I know are in that situation. They have the bug. They know they want to compete lifelong, but like, what do they do until, everyone says, like, I just want to grow for a couple years, but like, what does that mean? What's the best way to do it? And I guess a bunch of mistakes that people make too. So, Brad, do you have a lot of people in that position?
Yeah. And really, to be honest with you, it's how I think you hit the nail on the head. What does it mean to grow for a couple of years? You know what I mean? And that in itself is a very subjective thing. But, oftentimes we kind of hear the classic, well, I want to be leaner, but I want to gain muscle, and that's such a dichotomy. It's like two opposite ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes, you do just have to kind of try as best you can to control your body weight long term, and it's kind of like Alberto has given many times in his long season, planning stages. It's like, let's quote unquote bulk, but let's do it in a very controlled fashion over long periods of time with, short periods of dieting for, like you said, practice and maybe because you're not, comfortable in your own skin or whatever, but then, you just go through phases of that and then you continue into your growing phase until you start your kind of pre-contest diet or whatever. But I mean, for growing, you have to kind of bite the bullet and know, what, I can't have my cake and eat it too. I can't get leaner, be lighter, and gain muscle, and at least not in the terms that everybody kind of thinks that it's there. It's like that holy grail almost.
Yeah, I think too, one more thing that I didn't mention yet, before we continue on, is that we're talking about people that when I say they just finished, I don't literally mean they just finished. Like in the podcast episode right before this, we discussed the recovery diet phase, and we're going to assume that the person that we're talking about too for the rest of this episode is fully quote unquote healed, like has an appropriate amount of body fat, isn't food crazy, isn't food focused, is emotionally healed, hormones are back in check, all that stuff. So listeners, we're talking about someone who's maybe 1 year removed from show and probably like 3 years from another. Bert, do you have that same experience too, where everyone wants to do both gaining and getting lean at the same time all the time?
Both gaining for sure, and I think once they understand that outside of very specific situations, it doesn't work that way.
What are those situations, if you don't mind me interrupting you? Like when you say those what are the very few, in y'all's opinions?
A great example, actually, I was prior to this, I was snooping on my friend Josh Hyaduk on his Instagram. So he took about a almost 2 year hiatus from lifting altogether. Mm-hmm. And just recently, he started to train again. And he's lost about 10 pounds, but he's humongous. He's like lean and muscular. And he's put on surely about 10-ish pounds of muscle, I'd say, or lean body mass, while losing about pounds. And a lot of that's because, he's been through this before, so he knows how to take the straightest route to point A. He's also genetically very, very gifted, but mostly it's the experience and the fact that he's been there before. So you can, that's one example, someone who is, coming back after a long way off, or a beginner where, when you first start out, you're like, oh, this is great. I can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, but that only works for so long, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously the other one is drugs, which that's not,
we're not talking about that right now.
In our vocabulary.
Yeah. So those are the three circumstances where that does happen.
Yeah.
And you hear the body recomp thing like being thrown out there quite a bit. Like, well, I'm just gonna recomp, and it's like, dude, show me like one really good recomp that you know of that didn't happen under those circumstances.
Yeah.
Or because someone was doing so many things like fundamentally wrong, like so many things, like they were eating 50 grams of protein or something, right?
Yeah. Or giant changes in training. Yeah, or they were training that stupidly prior.
Like they had to get so many things wrong. So
yeah.
Once they understand that, like it needs to be, one of those situations that it just doesn't work that way. And they're sold on it. And I think even people who are very objective when it comes to their decision making in regards to their physique development, it gets to the point where, like, regardless of what phase you're in, when you're really deep in one side, like the grass is always a bit greener on the other side. You know, like 4 weeks out, like I can't wait for this off season so that I can push all this weight and make all this progress. And the other way around, you're quite a few pounds over contest weight, and you all your friends are getting shredded, and you just want to join back. And people will make sometimes, usually in the off season, the wrong calls when it comes to that. Usually people will abandon a gaining phase a bit too prematurely, because they're just not comfortable in their skin. And a lot of this this specifically happens to people who have been on stage, who have seen themselves in phenomenal shape. And now that becomes a gold standard for being in shape, which is another reason why I think before you compete is like get in shape for yourself a few times. Before I competed, I remember when I was like 170, 180, I thought I looked freaking great. And like now that is like, I thought I was cut. Like I was rocking it during the summer. And obviously now my goals have changed, and it's a very different look. It's only appropriate for the stage. And serves me no other use other than that point in time. But yeah, I think usually in gaining phases, that's probably where people have a hard time investing. Even though we're all sold that this is a slow process, that natural bodybuilding is slow, that it's only for the patient. People have a hard time. Some really smart, intelligent people will about face like once they get to that point.
I'm pretty sure I've done that.
I think we all have.
But shoot, I've just done that here, in the last couple months. Remember, Eric had to talk me out of doing like a mini cut,
Yeah. Well, and I think what's... go ahead, Brad.
No, you go.
No, I was going to say what I think is hard, too, is when we think of the famous people, which you always say, right? So... I think it'd be crazy for me not to say, like, people look up to the four of you gentlemen as far as who handle their shit well as a career lifetime bodybuilder, right? And what you guys do because of your experience is very different than how you would plan for an athlete most of the time. Like, for example, which I swear I want to get into in a couple of minutes, Bert, is like if you were going to lay out your ratios of like cutting versus gaining, all that stuff. But for example, like Brad, you did a phenomenal series last year on gaining strength while cutting. And the ways... Yeah,
that was last.
Yeah, and so everyone, I think now, is so used to the mini cut, the abrupt, and then chill, right? And what you did, and you explained in that video series, was how you were like, I picked 2 to 4 days a week where I ate at below maintenance, and then when it was easy for me, and over time I just kind of lost weight, while not affecting your strength. And I think that's hard for a lot of people because they see like, Brad, you could lose weight and it wasn't hard for you, or like Berto, you lost weight and it was so fast, and they don't know, those two right there, those are conflicting. And so I guess I could understand how one would be confused or indecisive about their off season when they are looking out for like great resources for it, and you two would be tremendous resources. People, you've helped many people do that, but y'all have done it to yourselves very differently. So, Brad, typically, like, how would you gauge, like, if you had someone who wanted to do a mini cut and it was a pretty good time for them, Would you recommend that slower, gradual thing? Would you recommend the fast, pull the rug out, or a combination of both? And if, like, I realize this is a long-ass question, sorry. Or do you, like, what are things that it depends on? Because I'm sure not every person gets the same protocol, but, like, what are the things that you weigh when you're deciding between, like, a fast or a slow?
And you'll probably have to interrupt me, Andrea, so don't feel guilty if you have to, because that could get kind of long.
I know, I'm good at interrupting, so it's okay.
I just talked to a client yesterday where we specifically designed really short, kind of invasive mini cuts.
Okay.
And the reason that I did that for him, he kind of I guess kind of belittled his training experience in the gym. He's done weight training for like 16 years, know, and he was like, oh, well, at least 12 of that didn't even count, because it was just, training for sport. I think he played some other sport or something like that. I'm like, yeah, but dude, I said, number one, look at your physique. You've got a good physique with a lot of muscle. That doesn't get built in 4 years, and he wanted that classic, I want to be lighter, but more muscular and gain more muscle, and so for him, I thought, you know what, you're already pretty lean. You didn't like how you quote unquote bulked before. Let's go through like 8-1 or like 16-2 phases here. Let's think 8 weeks, subtle bulking. I think I programmed like maybe at most a pound and a half a month or something like that. Shoot, I may even have his protocol up here. But then a real invasive cut, and then, back at it again. And like I said, either an 8-1 or a 16-2 ratio. But that's a guy that's been in the gym for 16 years, who's kind of desensitized to training, who's not going to just up and build a lot of muscle very quickly. And so that was kind of the reason that I made that for him, so that he could take advantage of those gaining phases. And if he was able to gain, I think the example I gave him was, let's say that he was able to gain 100 grams of muscle, in this 16-week period, maybe when he did his quick little mini cut, he might lose 40 grams of it. So even though he took 3 steps forward, he only took 1 step back. Now, like Berto said, somebody that's a quarter of his training age, I'd probably do it much different, in fact, somebody that maybe has done everything wrong and has had really poor structure, maybe we can put them in a very, very subtle deficit where they are just under eating a couple days a week. Really give them a good structured, maybe even aggressive progression, because they are fairly new. And maybe we can get that rare instance like Berto was talking about, where we can do that recomp, you know what I mean? And then the phases might be the exact opposite. They might be kind of more like 8 weeks with that subtle cut, a week at surplus, 8 weeks at that subtle cut, a week at surplus. So I know that was kind of long, but hopefully that kind of answers your question in those 2 different people that I would kind of plan different phases like that for.
Yeah, that was useful. And Bert, if you had, or at least, can you go over the part in the presentation that you gave in London about like your typical ratios for someone who is an experienced bodybuilder, how you'd spend the next, maybe not for yourself, but someone in a similar situation, like how you would spend the next 2 to 5 years if you were going to compete, ratio-wise?
Okay, if you were going to compete, you want to maximize your growth, I definitely feel that at most fat loss should be about 25% of where you spent your time, at most. And and that might mean that for some people, when it comes to gaining, they just haven't really developed the same form of discipline that they might have when they're going through a fat loss phase. And I know a lot of people that are great at fat loss, but then come time to gain, they have a hard time pacing it the same way they do fat loss.
Yeah.
And it might start off where, hey, maybe 4 months is all you can give me. Like after 4 months, it's like, I gain more than whatever that ceiling was that we agreed upon. And then maybe the next go around, we're able to get 6 months. And then before you know it, you're able to get a full year. But it takes some time. And just how there's, people think of adherence and willpower, they think fat loss, they think that part of a dieting phase. There's so much of that involved when we're talking about a well-planned gaining phase. To me, it's, if anything, because the process is slower, you're not getting immediate feedback, instant gratification with every single week. I think, to be honest, that is where you really see who has the willpower. So ideally, so 4-1, 25%. And again, maybe your first go around, your first few times, it's like you can gain for 4 months, and then then you only need 1 month to clean up. And then over time, we get to the point where, hey, 8 months, and 2 months to clean up, and we're actually using our time up wisely, and we don't have to stop whatever momentum we do have going to clean up the mess you created. So yeah, just not being wasteful with your surplus is probably the best way to describe it. And I think people are too wasteful when it comes to their surplus. It's like, dude, you don't need 800 calories a day over maintenance to recover.
Yeah. I think you said a bunch of things I want to cut into. That's such a great fucking point. Is people don't know how to just maintain in general, right? There's the high of getting jacked, which again, usually that comes with fat and you just don't realize that you're just playing it off as a bulk. And then there's the high of getting lean and looking awesome. But then it's like, how can you just hang out? And that's hard. I couldn't do it until probably the last year, and just because I was chasing another sport. Like, that's not easy, because it doesn't, either direction, you at least feel like there's some progress being made. Now, obviously for girls, the whole like lean gaining is not usually as easy typically as it is for a male, because at least a dude, you're filling out your shirts and shit, right? A girl doesn't really want to fill out her shirts, but like it's at least looks like progress, if even month after month. Whereas the maintaining, that might be like me, it's like I gotta look back like 6 months to see that I made progress, but it's there, and I don't know. I why do y'all think that's so hard for people? Just because the lack of feeling like there's progress in one way or another?
Gosh, good question.
I think people are just impatient. That's really what it comes down to. Impatient. And I mean, being uncomfortable is something that a lot of people are just not comfortable with. And again, we always talk about that, like during a contest prep, you're gonna have to be very uncomfortable, and they usually look at you square on the edge like, I got this, coach, I will grind away. But then come time to gain, it's like, when I sit down, there's some rolls there, and I really dislike this, and it's learning to be just comfortable with. And again, these people often know fundamentally why we're doing this, why we don't want to turn back, and we've built up all this momentum and all these PRs. Like, that's the way I think about it. Like, I might be fat, but all these PRs are going into like gains,
Yeah.
Whereas like bittersweet, you hit a PR when you're dieting, and you hit a PR, you're like, I'm not even eating enough to support growth. But so I think it's just people are not comfortable with that. And that's why you need to enjoy and like learn to love your off-season body and see its purpose.
Yeah.
So important. Purpose
versus like social currency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like Bert said, I would have to agree to him, because now that I think about it, so much of my early bodybuilding career was spent in that short-term gratification where I could see progress. I could see myself getting leaner. I could see myself dropping body fat. That's relatively easy, and really comes weekly and monthly. And I don't think that I really did get comfortable with an off-season body until, probably 9, 10, 11 years into my bodybuilding career.
Yeah.
So Andrew, you're way ahead of me in that aspect.
Well, and like I said too.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I'd agree with Berto.
Yeah, I think it was the distraction, because it wasn't even powerlifting that distracted me enough. it was having like this sport with like all these new skills to learn. It's like even if the PR like weightlifting progress was moving, that still wasn't fast enough to where like in my current sport I have like 50 things I can learn. Like literally, you know, and it's like, and I don't know if that comes from my gymnastics background, but like, instead of this one big goal, there's like all these little tiny ones. Or in powerlifting, these 3 big goals still wasn't enough. It's like I needed all these little things to see. So it might be not that I learned to get more patient, but more that I've found other smaller things to chase because,
Correct.
you know what I mean? Like it was just hacking the system probably. It's like I'm still impatient. I just have other shit that I decided that I could focus on. Y'all said a lot of cool shit. I'm going to try to go through it. Yeah. When we say gaining and mini cuts or whatever like that, what is your appropriate amount of weight gain for someone? I'm going to ask both. Well, it's probably the same answer. Like for someone in their first year or 2 of lifting versus someone who's in their like 5 to 15 years of lifting. I lied. 10 to 15 years of lifting. Like your current appropriate weight for a gaining rate of a gaining phase for you, Brad, and for you, Bert, versus like an athlete in their first 1 to 5 years of their journey. Brad?
I'm going to let Bert go first because I'm interested in his answer.
Is this a game? Okay, go ahead, Bert.
Yeah. Shoot. So we'll just talk intermediate because I think that's where the majority of people, we don't have too many newbies here, and all the advanced people, they know what they're doing, right? Well, they might think
they might think they do.
Well, with intermediate, you know, I'd say it's never going to be linear, first of all. I think that's the one thing that sometimes has people bailing out. Like maybe it's November, and for those of you who live in good old America, like November is a month of excess, right? And, you know, that might be the one month where you gain a bit over what you have scheduled. And so typically what I like to do is for people, I will set a certain weight range that's acceptable for every month. So it makes it okay if some months are a little slower, some months are a little faster. Again, like somewhere between 0.5% to 1% of your body weight is probably about right per month. However, not every month is going to look that way. And I think so long as like the net anabolism over the course of time of say 8 months, because let's just say that's what we committed to. We committed to 8 months. So long as it's somewhere within whatever, you know, you multiply those figures by 8. So long as it's somewhere within that range, I think you're okay. So I think firstly, if you have a fast month, if you have a bad few weeks, just know that it works that way. Same way with fat loss, right? Some weeks you lose pounds, some weeks you lose no weight, but you look better. That's probably right for most intermediates.
Males.
That percent males. However, I will say that with females, it might be because if you scale it down, they have very similar muscle gaining potential. They're just not okay with it. That's
you think 1.5% or 1% for if it's like me, that's like 1.5 pounds in a month. Well, I'm also not as new as most.
But you're by your ceiling too. You're in your ceiling of what I would consider your off-season body weight. Like maybe you have 5 more pounds upwards where it'd be okay. So you would come back down at some point and then I could restart the phase if we were running something in that manner. I think for females, the same goes. I was of the opinion just a few years back that perhaps with females, it's not okay to let them gain weight. But there's been enough cases over the years where I've been wrong, or I've seen women add weight to the scale. And a good example of this is Kelsey. She came back 3 pounds heavier, and numerous times prior to that, where I'm just like, wow, you know, you girls can actually put on pounds and they can show up on the scale. However, it's hard to convince, like you said, you know, for dudes, it's like I'm filling out my shirts, I look like I lift. Whereas women, it's like that's part of the issue. Is like you're filling out your shirts.
Well, and what's funny too is I remember, we've talked about this on the show too, like. When I finished a season at like 115, 120, we were thinking powerlifting, like the 130 class, and I was like, no way. Like, I don't want to do any of the classes above 130 because that's too far from stage weight. But I looked the best I ever looked in off season now at like 145. And I was, but when I was 145 a year after my last show, it was a fat ass 145 compared to now. I don't know if that was a function of time or not a fat ass, but like, it was very different looking than it is now. Mm-hmm. Do you find that that's more of a function of time or a function of, because I'm eating a hell lot of a lot more than I was 2 years ago when I was at the same body weight. A function of time, a function of allowing myself to eat, or it's kind of a combination of both usually? Like, what do you feel like people suck at more, not being time patient or being scared to eat enough because they're scared of gaining weight too fast?
Probably the latter. I would agree with.
Okay.
Because I've got a little gal on my roster that's not too dissimilar from you, Andrea. Okay. She got shredded for her competition, and she was freaking out, when she started gaining weight.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, like you, I'm sure that you kind of felt like, the conditioning was fading a little bit too fast. But, it kind of comes to a certain point where you get the athlete to get that buy-in, that we talked about, I think, in one of the other episodes. And just say, look, let's look at things logically here. Yes, you have gained 20 pounds since you competed. But let's look at your pictures and look at yourself in the mirror. Do you really look like you've gained 20 pounds? There's a lot of times, and I think you just kind of said that you just experienced that same thing. Now, why is that? I have yet to figure it out. But my theory is that almost all of these people were pretty haphazard with their training prior to their competition. Mm-hmm. They were always kind of about making it feel like it was working, and they weren't really tracking progress on a week to week basis. If it just as long as it felt like it was working, it was working, And then of course, once they transition into contest prep and we put them on more structured training where we're tracking volume, whether quantifiably or unquantifiably, and now that's continued into their recovery portion, sometimes I think there might be a little bit of recomp that's going on there, you know what I mean? Because they have lost muscle, they have lost weight, they have managed to progress or at least maintain their training, volume throughout their prep, and now they're eating in a sensible fashion. Maybe there is, some muscle that's going on there that, we can't necessarily figure out why the scale is jumping a lot more than what's happening in visually as to what we're seeing, but yeah, I think that a lot of times is the demise of many a recovery physique athlete because they are afraid to see that scale moving. They are afraid to eat. They are afraid to say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. This body is not good for anything but, getting in a skimpy outfit up on the bodybuilding stage, and I need to get out of this, So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but that's I would say more the latter than anything.
Yeah. Something else that you had said, Bert, was when you said people take the bulk, they kind of abuse it, right? And you don't want to say bulk. The lean gaining phase gets abused a lot. And I've found with a lot of my athletes who maybe we started in prep or maybe we just finished a cut of whatever sort, and when we attempt to loosen up a little bit, it just all goes to shit. You know what I mean? Like self-control. Okay, now you can back off 2 notches, but then that ends up being like every weekend or every 5 days, and it's that mental switch kind of flips off when it should have just been dialed down just a smidge. Is that, you find that too? Is that how it gets abused, I guess, most of the time?
I like how we have to call it a lean gaining phase. It's like we have to, it's a lean.
Yeah.
gain weight because it's an issue. It's realistically an issue. I mean, no one really says like, you know what, I'm going to gain a shit ton of fat this offseason. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah.
No one says that. So, but yeah.
Because if I say bulk, everyone thinks get fat as shit or eat all the foods.
And that's why I hate that word.
And it's just, I guess it's maybe partially human nature to be that way, and I think just over time, you kind of learn to reel that in. I think people discover how to contest prep before they actually ever learn how to properly off season. Again, you have a deadline. You're going to be up on stage competing, and it's going to be very obvious if you didn't do your work. So that's a little bit easier. However, like your next show's in 2 years, 3 years, it's very easy to just continue eating those cold fries that you're still eating. You're not even hungry anymore, but you're still eating. And then here we are 4 months later, like, and you're asking Coach Bert, can I diet? And it's like, dude, no.
Yeah.
But, so it's again, there's only so much. We know that muscle growth is capped, and that's capped by genetics, your training age. So don't take more than you need to.
More food isn't going to turn into muscle. It's just not.
It won't. It's going to turn into a blob like sooner, or your version of the blob. But yeah, and I think that's becomes even more important as you become more advanced. We set out those figures for an intermediate-ish athlete, but for a more advanced guy, like for me, the way I kind of pick apart my off season is I kind of have an intake that's assumed to be maintenance, and then like little indulgences across the way kind of carry me on. But like often, I'm pretty sure if you look at my 30-day calendar, there was a way for us to track this and really find out where I'm at with the energy balance equation. I think surely there's some kind of surplus there at the end of the month. However, it's so close at this point that I'm sure there's maybe 7 days where I was in some sort of deficit, whether it be minor or quite pronounced. So, and you need to keep things tighter, I feel, as you become more advanced. And I think partially part of your role as a more advanced bodybuilders, like you should gain control of that off season. Like you should be able to only take what you need. You should be able to relate to a goal that is not 10 weeks from now, but 2.5 years from now. That's part of growing up and maturing as an athlete. And your success, I really feel, depends on this. If you're more advanced and you have a longer ways to go because you have all this undoing that you have to do because you misbehaved during your gaining phase, you're more likely to lose those adaptations than that person that's 3 years into weight training. You're going to see that your success depends quite a bit on only deconditioning as much as you need to as an advanced bodybuilder. So, off season is just a great time for growth, whether it be mental or physical, and especially the mental side, because to be honest, like during a contest prep, that's probably not the best time to like learn to be balanced, learn to only take what you need. But that's one thing that the off season does, is that it reinforces those things that will be of great use to you like during many times.
Yeah. Well, in like life even. Like what you said, if you take a 30-day calendar and there might be 5 to 7 days you're under your pretty experienced figure of maintenance, and then there's the treats here and there, and it all ends up about maintenance. And that's kind of like how Brad, like you said in those videos, that's how you weren't in a deficit every day. It was like when it was easy on so many days a month. When it fit in. And I think instead of like on a cut, right, you give blanket prescriptions. I know you could do it like a contest prep. You could do it as loosely as you guys do, but for most people, like if we're coaching and we need that data, here's where you're eating for 8 days, you have 2 high days at this, and then you go back down, or whatever that is, 6 and 1 days, whatever it is for you, we give this prescription. And if like your off season, I think if people would allow themselves more freedom, then it almost makes it all easier. And this is just from my experience in the last like year and a half of my life, is when I want to have the fat ass cheeseburger like I do, but then I'll never do it like before a training day because I don't want to feel like shit in the morning. And then like just being responsible about when I do it, and it makes it easy. It's not planned, right? Because it was almost more difficult to off season when I had the planned high day, because it wasn't fluid, it wasn't able to move. And if like today when I'm recording podcasts and sitting on my ass, I'm just like not as hungry. I almost feel like that it makes it like people, it's counterintuitive for someone like me who's neurotic, who I always thought if I plan and I plan and I plan, then that'll get me to where I want to be. But it almost made it more difficult because it just made me think about if I was doing the right thing every day. I don't know, that's coming from like an intermediate dieter, I guess I would call myself. And you guys, like, I mean, it seems like from someone who's new, it just seems so easy, you know. And it took me, even though knowing you guys and being around you guys 2-3 years ago, you couldn't convince me to loosen up a little bit. But now that I have loosened up a little bit, I'm finding that it's much easier to maintain weight.
And that would have been hard to learn under your previous environment, where it was kind of, I wouldn't say yo-yo dieting, but there was kind of a tug of war with.
I wanted to be lean and strong. Like, I was just exactly the person we're talking about. Yeah, like and it wasn't. Again, it wasn't for necessarily vanity's sake. I just literally thought if I was 120 on stage, getting over 130 would be irresponsible of me, and I didn't want to do it. And I felt like I was failing at my sport. It wasn't like I was just gaining weight because I couldn't control myself. I was very controlled. It was, I was overly trying. Remember, you had to convince me not to do cardio all the time, like a year after my show. So, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how that works. I think so. I don't. What did you say in my previous environment? Right, that's what you're saying. My yo-yo.
Yeah. Well, you know, when we always bring up set point, but like settling point is probably what's more conducive to talk about when we do bring up set point, and that was your settling point, and that part of that was what was going on in your own mind, and you know, the pressures from the stage and a few other things, but yeah, now you're in a way better place, and I think that is part of the off season too, is kind of having the fact that you're 2 years or so away from a show, the fact that you can have that cheeseburger, you know, the fact that I don't want to train today, you know, that sort of stuff. I think that's good for you too, you know, and it works towards the mental side of things.
Yeah. I don't get that. I don't want to train today. It's just my off day. It's my programmed off day.
I hate taking off days too. I'm with you.
It's different now. Okay, I was telling someone this the other day, that if I was still just doing bodybuilding and powerlifting programming, I would, like when my mom, a couple days ago when I went to go see my mom, I still came home and got my training in because it was in my sheet. But the difference is because I have a coach every day who does my programming, and I didn't want to go right in, I didn't do this today. That's the only thing. It didn't have to do with like, I know my session was shitty. My times weren't that great, but it was like, it's just different because I literally, this is what you're doing today, and I have to say, this is what I did today. This is what you're doing today. And then, so I won't miss a session now, but not because, like, again, if it was an 8-week block that you or I had made for me, I would have been like, I'll just save it for tomorrow. But that's a whole another coaching accountability, can of worms.
Yeah, can of worms.
Yeah. But you're right. Like, I knew I felt like shit. If my day, and it's not because I can't, not because I don't feel like it usually. If I wasn't, when I was doing bodybuilding, powerlifting stuff, it's because I always want to go, but if I know when I go it's not going to be good or useful or as good as it could be, is when I'll make it wait for the other day. You know? Which is why when we have mashups, I'm like, I'll just do an arm day, because I don't want to have a shitty squat day.
Exactly. Don't say that. Now when we have matchups, everyone's going to have a Norm day.
I'm like, we'll just switch bench and arm
Everybody's going to be curling in the squat rack.
Because I get so excited and I want to talk to everybody, and then it's too much time between my sets, or I'm not focused enough, and I don't want to snap my shit up. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Agree. But yeah, deloading that deadline mindset, I think, is a big one for me. Like, after a contest season, like, it's funny that morning when you wake up and you're like, oh, there's nothing I have to be on time to necessarily. It's the most odd. And it used to feel bad, and I used to get empty nest syndrome about that. But like now it's like I don't gotta do anything. Like I can stay here in bed and I can order food. You know, you need that. You need that mental deload, and that's something. I mean, it's football season. Could you guys imagine if like American, rules football was like season like year long?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No.
People left.
No
Yeah.
way.
You could do it while you're doing cardio.
They kind of do it.
No,
They kind of do it to you in their own way. They kind of gnaw away at you. So, yeah, just being able to put that away. Besides the fact that like I am kind of a Nazi when it comes to like how you spend your time in the off season, especially if being a physique athlete is what you want to do and you want to maximize that. But there is that other component that just like, hey, dude, chill out. It's off season.
Yeah. And there's something too to be said for like saving up willpower, Like I think too, it's pretty rare that you find someone that's willing to, besides me and Brad, count in and out of season for years and years, right? It's like, again, the whole like give someone an inch, they take like 1,000 miles and go eat a whole 7 pizzas or whatever every weekend because they got hammered, and like that's cool to do once every while, but if you're doing it every weekend, that's like when the shit adds up. And so I think what I was saying with like the freedom to move things is most people work 5 days a week, have their weekends, and it's like if you program a surplus but you still go out every weekend and do your thing, like the problem isn't going out every weekend and do your thing, it's that if you're going to continue to do that, go with that flow and maybe have your week be a slight deficit. Like just shit like that, that's I guess allowing, like if you can notice your habits and work with them as opposed to trying to fight them, I feel like it gets a lot easier.
And I'm curious, Andrea, are you still tracking your macros?
I'd say like 4 to 6 days a week. Not every day now. Now if there's if any day is weird, I almost ignore it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like,
there is an outlier.
Like most Saturdays, Saturdays, after we train, Brandon and I go explore the city. So like yesterday, after we trained, I had a fat cheeseburger and a margarita, and then I slept all afternoon. And then, because the day before I'd gone to San Antonio to see my mom, which was an all day thing. And then I had like a normal dinner, but that's like a weird day. But like on my normal training weekdays, I always track because it's easy to, and I know the foods and whatever. And, I track somewhere between, I'm usually like 17 to 2,100 calories, depending if I had 2 training sessions or not. And then something like, and again, the day, I guess Friday too, I didn't track 2 days. Yeah. Cause Friday I got up at like 3 a.m. to go to San Antonio to take my mom to her doctor thing. So I didn't track that day either because I know I'm going to be up like 5 more hours than normal. I'm probably going to eat more, and it's like, meh. But I don't recommend that for like any, but actually I do. I recommend finding ways within your shit. And this is how my shit's going lately, right? But, I track, like I said, at least 4 days, usually 6.
And the reason that I asked you that is you and I have been very similar in the fact that we really like tracking our macros and we like tracking calories.
Yeah.
I have legitimately tracked 3 days since we got back from London.
Really?
I have not like physically tracked in MyFitnessPal, but for 3 days since we got back from London. And the reason that I brought this up is you talked about mental deloads and you talked about saving up willpower. You know what I mean? I just kind of got burned out on it, and I needed a mental deload. I needed to not be able or not have to consult with MyFitnessPal to see what it was that I, wanted or needed to eat, I guess you might say. And this is where I really like a lot of my clients to eventually get to. Some might get there sooner, some might get there later, and we always kind of use the tier system of either tracking just calories and protein or just tracking body weight. But I really would prefer that a lot of my clients at some point in their off season, eventually get to that same point that I'm at. Because like right now, I'm not tracking at all, and because I've been using flexible dieting now for so many years, you can't help but know where you're at.
Yeah.
In any given part of the day. When I go to work in Reno, I'll have 2 foot-long sandwiches. I know that that's 1,800 calories. I need 24. So before I leave, I'll just have myself a quick little 300-calorie meal and then have my 2 foot-long sandwiches, and I know where I'm at.
Yeah.
Like you had the cheeseburger and the margarita, 1,400 calories, and you just shot down right there, right?
That's great.
So you probably knew for dinner you needed, like what, 600, 800, something like that, right?
Yeah. That was one of those days, though, too, where it's like, I'm going to be really far over. Tomorrow I'm off. I'm usually really far under. So, like, it was kind of more one of those things. It wasn't,
Exactly.
When the cheeseburger and the margarita happens, I know we're not hitting macros today. And that's why I don't track it. It's because it's like, meh.
Well, and that's the thing is you're not tracking macros, but I'll bet you at least hit your calories just because you're mindful of it.
Yeah, in the back of my mind, I know, like, I'm probably going to be over at least, like, 500 or 600 calories. And then Sundays, I sleep in really late, and I don't do much, so I usually eat pretty far under. And it's just...
so you can't...
Yeah.
You can't help but know where you're at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Just be aware
of it.
But
not. Yeah. And that's where and to be honest with you, I've really embraced this over the last couple of months because progress has been so good in the gym, and I'm seeing the strength gains and I'm seeing the progress. It's almost kind of like I don't want to cut. I'm afraid to cut. And then, because I wanted to make my weight class at Raw Nationals, I just was not even really tracking other than being mindful of it and watching my weight. And guess what? I dropped a couple of pounds in the last 2 weeks, and not even really trying, you know what I mean? And that's where I wish that people could really see the beauty of flexible dieting because, I mean, sure, it may feel like a waste of energy and maybe you're tracking macros when you maybe don't have to, but boy, the knowledge that you gain from it is just invaluable for when you're in phases like this. And plus, I'm probably at some point going to do a cut at bodybuilding or making a lower weight class, and that's when I'll need all this willpower that I'm storing up right now from not tracking. I'll be able to put that willpower into when I do need to start tracking because, just like in the Sacrifice to Win and all the other podcasts we've done, there's going to come a point when that pendulum is going to have to switch over to the other side, and I'm going to have to track, and I'm going to have to sacrifice, and I'm going to have to do things that we all have to do, in order to get what it is that we're after.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something, too, that probably led to why I had such big freakouts before and, like, I don't anymore is because, like you said, Berto, there's that settling point. So now when I do have really high days food-wise and really low days, the body weight, if I tend to, like... It's not that different. Whereas when you're dealing with an unrecovered body or an underfed body, the difference, you do have a higher day. They're like, oh shit, I gained 4 pounds the next day. Da, da, da. Like your body's a lot more receptive, or it's quick to be responsive to meals and to food when it's not settled, when it's still semi-starved. And so I think like it always seemed like if I ever did eat too much, my body would really respond, and so then I was scared to eat too much because I didn't want. And now it's like if I overeat or undereat, my body's still around the same, so it's not a big deal. Does that make sense?
That's a great way to decide where you should hang around at.
Yeah.
This is a great way to decide, am I too lean for my off season? Is like, if I deviate a little bit, do I pay for it?
Yeah.
Chances are that you're probably running around a bit leaner than your body will.
And even when I was this weight back then, when I was like squishy or whatever, I think I was still attempting to live a life on far less calories. Mm-hmm. So I think other than it not, maybe that was a good body weight, but I was in an underfed state, I think, to be that responsive, just an overstressed state, I guess is a way to put it. Because not eating enough and then the mental stress of not being how I want to look and like just over cardio and all that stuff. Bert, one thing that I wanted to ask you too in terms of this stuff is a lot of people have heard us talk about how important it is to have a gaining phase. I'm sure you get asked this a lot. Why wouldn't you just keep gaining for the whole 2 years? Why do you interrupt it? What's the strategy for that?
Yeah, at a certain point, you're too fat. You're way too fat, right? It's just kind of like at a certain point, you need to start like losing body fat, or you're just like dead, right? So obviously the consequences are far greater one way than the other. But you also, you don't want to decondition yourself too much to the point where there's more work that needs to be done when we are ready to set our goals towards a contest prep diet.
And the logic there, too, is that you're getting enough body fat to where you're in a primed state to gain. Because then people would be like, well, why don't you just not gain as much and just hover closer? And then you wouldn't. Like, I guess the question I'm asking is, if you could manage it, why not just chill at a decently lean state while trying to gain versus bigger surplus, bigger deficit,
I think, there's a few things going on there.
Okay.
I think... Firstly, there's something to building momentum, right? And I think that's probably one of the issues with like shortening your gaining phase, is that we hit that hot streak where things are just like so predictable and things are moving so well that you don't want to get into that. Another one, and this is quite odd, and I actually was going to make a post on Facebook about this, that even though we have all this data, formal data on like how, the synthetic factors that go into muscle growth and how that works, muscle growth doesn't seem like it's linear, like not in the real world. Like I think all of us have been training long enough, we get to the point where we're training, and then like boom, like, oh wow, where did that come from? That's totally new. And I feel by having too much back and forth, you're going to miss out on a lot of those little surges that do happen. And again, I've yet to hear a real good explanation for those surges and why it works that way. But anyone who's been doing this long enough will tell you that muscle gain is just, it's like, it was going okay, and then all of a sudden, boom. Like, I've never seen that before. That's new. And again, like most physique athletes don't miss out on the details. They can hardly ever walk by a mirror without making sure the gains are still there. So you have that one, and then staying too low. I think it just, we talked about balance and developing that sort of balance. I think it's a lot easier, like for me, it's a lot easier to have a much more balanced lifestyle, more predictable everything from recovery to my response to other stresses in life when I am at this weight as opposed to 10 pounds lighter, right?
So all of that were really good reasons why not to yo-yo too often. But what I was asking was, it's okay. The way that you would prescribe like a 4-to-1 ratio. So that might be like Brad said, a 16-2 or an 8 or whatever that is for you and for your plan. Why do you think that ratio needs to exist? Why not? I'm competing in 2 years. I'm competing in 2 years. I won't diet until a year and 8 months or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And for some people, they might be able to do that. Maybe someone who's super meticulous and they really only take. Although I do feel that there is such thing as a gaining phase that's too slow, or perhaps, when we look at our 1 year calendar, you might have spent like half the time like at a deficit, or perhaps a very, very, very ambiguous intake.
Right.
So, you definitely don't want to stutter step. You don't want your intake to, within certain means, be ambiguous. So I do feel that some people can stretch it out that long, but we do need to cut it at a certain point. I think one, it gives us some kind of deadline, and I think by having a person commit to like, okay, these are 10 months of gaining. Let's do a lot of good work between these phases. That period in time no longer feels as lost compared to a contest prep diet. And then also, I love the idea of having practice fat loss phases. Maybe certain things that we might try out that can come in handy next time we compete. So, for example, I have many athletes who come from an approach where they were maybe using one refeed a week, and now I want to try this way of doing it where we have more than one refeed a week, and they just don't really trust that. They think it's going to affect the results. So, we can experiment with new things, both when it comes to fat loss or training during a fat loss phase during those mini cuts. So they offer a lot of benefit in terms of just good book learning for the
Brad, when you have someone in a mini cut versus a actual prep, how much more aggressive are you with that cut, if at all? Or do you attack them kind of the same?
Aggressive, how? Aggressive, like, as in how meticulous they are with their tracking, or how aggressive I am with their diet programming?
Diet programming, like how deep of a deficit? Is it more aggressive than a typical initiation of a contest prep phase? Okay.
Well, first of all, I always like to, go to the client. What is the rate of loss that you would like to go for here?
Okay.
Because ultimately they're the customer, and I'll always do like a barter system. I'll say, well, I think we should do this, and then we'll kind of find a happy medium. But I always I refer to what it is that they're after first.
Okay.
And then once we find that common ground, then we'll program for that. Now, as far as, like, for example, the gentleman that I just talked to you guys about that was, a solid intermediate, I was pretty aggressive. I planned for a 1 pound, a solid 1 pound loss in a week. So that was a 3,500 calorie deficit. And, keep in mind that he's 148 pounds. So it's not like his maintenance calories were very high.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think we had to go from like 16,000 calories a week down to, like, I think we went down to 12,000 with food, and then we had him doing like another 500 of cardio. So in my mind, that's pretty aggressive. That's a 1 pound loss, which is what? That's almost 1% of his body weight in 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was aggressive, but again, that's a short 1 or 2 week diet break, right? Or excuse me, mini cut. So
that is short. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I was pretty aggressive for that little short period of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, like I've done with me and with some clients that, with me, it's like while I don't want to necessarily fool myself into thinking that I'm keeping all of this muscle, when I'm in my slow cuts, my slow, kind of gaining strength while dieting phases,
mm-hmm.
I do feel like I can maintain my strength at least. And a lot of times that is my focus when I'm doing those longer cuts, you know what I mean? And so I think it depends a little bit on, training age, what the client wants, and then ultimately what it is that you think that what the purpose of your cut is. With me, I want to keep my strength, so I might go for a longer period of time with a more subtle deficit. Somebody that might be a little bit more focused on their aesthetics, them I probably might be more aggressive and just get in and then get back out again and get back to gaining and kind of that 3 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a mentality.
Okay.
And there's all kinds of
gray.
That's why we're in this. There's all that customized training for all those other circumstances. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think you better have a reason and a purpose for your cut, and don't just cut because whatever reason it is that I want to cut for.
Yeah. Berto, do you find that, because we've talked about a lot on a lot of the podcasts that, for most people who are crazy enough to get into this sport are of the breed to where cutting is much easier than coming out of a cut. Do you find that because you do mini cuts with people sporadically, do they have issues getting back to a gaining phase without losing their shit? Or is it not as bad because the duration of a mini cut's so much shorter? Yeah, like is there ever a need for obviously a physical recovery, because we're not mini cutting to the point where they would need like a hormonal recovery phase of all kinds, but psychologically, do you find that like mini cuts sometimes can set people up for like, oh shit, now because they were restricted, now they have those tendencies of losing control. It's not like, you know what I mean, they kept their shit tight for that month, and now we have a month of them fucking up, and then we can get back to normal, you know?
Well, realistically, like, let's just say it was executed to a T with this intermediate lifter, within our gaining period, we gained 4 to 8% above our starting weight.
Okay.
Right? So we have these two points where we do most of our work between the low end of that settling point and then the high end of that settling point, and we kind of go back and forth between there. So for most people, the low end is pretty good, but it shouldn't be so lean that it's like, oh, I'm missing that ab vein that runs across all the way into my chest, and I can't live life without it. I'm just a bad person if I don't have that ab vein. I don't get this. So it's never that lean to the point where people usually get that neurotic.
Okay.
And then it shouldn't be so sloppy to the point where we totally dislike the way we like. Once you kind of have a good understanding of where your settling point is, and for some people, the high end of their settling point is like no abs. And I know it sounds kind of like wrong, physique athlete, but there's periods where I have absolutely no abs, and once they're okay with them and with that, and again, like, I think this is one thing you said in a previous podcast, is that like part of maximizing yourself as a physique athlete is like learning to learning yourself, basically.
Yeah.
And like realizing that, okay, this is just like my sweet spot in the off season. Like, this is where I need to do the work. And I think just kind of like giving it that purpose, that this has a very specific purpose now. Like, we are a physique athlete. And again, not everyone has to look at it this way, but I would want people more over time to look at their physique in the same manner that athletes look at certain traits that they possess that make them good at their sport. It's going to disconnect you from putting too much self-worth on like where your body fat is and how that relates to a lot of other things that contribute to our self-esteem. So you shouldn't be like, it shouldn't throw you off too much. I will, however, sometimes, like if we happen to have a fat loss phase that lands during, I don't know, a vacation, certain months that are a bit warmer than others, and they're like, you know what, can I just have like 2-3 weeks where we just kind of eat at maintenance and I just kind of get to enjoy this a bit? That's fine, But again, those are like little details that, are on an athlete-to-athlete basis. As soon as I am done mini cutting, like, I am so about the bottom line that I'm like, okay, I need to turn back, and I have a schedule to keep up with, and I need to make progress.
Yeah.
So, like, I am at Burger King that very next morning.
Damn, that's a really good point. It's a subjective sport, but it's easier to deal with when you can learn to objectify yourself. As weird as that sounds.
Yeah.
Huh. Never thought of it that way.
Sounds like a quote.
Yeah, Steve, get it. There you go. It's a square.
I am a curveball. That'll make no sense.
Oh God. So, what's the longest that you guys typically, like, in your recommendation, like very general, if someone is not in a prep, what's the longest you'll let someone diet? Before you're like, okay, now it's not fucking useful. Now we're just not making the gains.
Well, I think probably outside of ourselves, and maybe most advanced, type of weight trainers, I wouldn't want to see anybody cut for more than a month, and I think a month is kind of extreme.
Okay.
What do you think, Bert?
I think it's going to be relative to the gaining phase. Like, so I think Eric said this at some point that and it kind of fits in with a lot of different scales out there. It's like for every month gaining, I think it was, you get a week of cutting,
which is still 25%. Oh, look at that! We're on the same
so,
page.
but like how long? Like let's just say sometimes I'll have something scheduled for someone where it's a 6-week cutting phase. Like if they're having issues, like to the point, and this does happen, especially in the off season, it's very different from prep. So that's another thing. This will happen with mini cuts often in the off season, where they're like, coach, I can't keep it together during the weekends. Like once that social situation comes up, I can order the salad for some reason. So I have pulled the plug on mini cuts for that reason. That someone's just, I'm like, dude, okay, let's just forego this. We've extended this mini cut by, like, it's twice as long as it needs to be now. We're actually tapping into like productive time and kind of having you hang with this back and forth, and it's causing you obviously some sort of mental stress because you can't do what you're supposed to and you don't feel good. Let's go back to gaining and recharge our batteries, if you will. So
interesting.
So yeah, I think the main reason that I think, again, so like that ratio I think is fine for most. Some people can lose quick, like for example, for a few reasons, when I mini cut, because I lose very well initially, because I know I can tolerate it, and because I'm so anxious to getting back to gaining that I just want to get past this. Like sometimes, I think my last mini cut was, and I better get it right. It was documented somewhere on
the interwebs.
Yeah, I think it was like 6 or so weeks. When relative to the gaining amount of time I spent gaining, it should have been over 2 months. But I didn't want to deal with it. I just wanted to be in and out, and I did that in a responsible manner, obviously. But
yeah.
But yeah, so athlete specific, for sure. But in general, I think I like that for every month gaining.
I like that. Is it bad that like the last 3 or 4 times I've run one, I'm like, okay, let's do an 8-week cycle of training and dieting, and then we can come back out and I match it up. I think it's really, I know there's no like right or wrong, but I think what's really cool about that every time it's happened, that I've seen it, and even when like I've done it myself or whatever, is like what's fun is that you can run that cut. Usually there's a testing at the end and you realize you didn't get weaker, and it's like, oh, okay. I mean, like I dieted for 8 weeks. We spent 8 weeks training. We tested. Nothing happened. We're still strong. We're a little lighter. Okay, let's keep going, kind of thing. But I remember one time we were with Melissa, and she was telling me, she's like, he won't let me diet more than 12 weeks. She was all mad about it, that you put like a restraint on it. And she wasn't even a competitor, right? And she just wanted to get lean, but she was like, yeah, he won't let me do it for that long. He said it's not productive. Stands out to me.
Yeah, that's almost a contest prep now at that point.
Yeah. Can we talk about, I guess the last thing, because we've been on this for like an hour and a half almost, the diet before the diet, which everyone's like, that's a Birdo thing. You got those pictures of Larry in your presentation, who ran it perfectly.
Larry.
Lawrence to go.
Larry.
Larry Goldberg. Larry Goldberg.
And by the way, Lawrence, one of the most awesome things like I've ever had a newer competitor say was like after his contest prep, which was his first contest prep. So again, for him to have this perspective, I thought was really awesome. He wanted to go into intuitive eating right away, but I think honestly for the right reasons. He just wanted to eat like an adult. He works at Google, and
it's too much free food.
Yeah. So it's like I just want to be normal, and like I want to have seconds if I want seconds. And the one thing he mentioned about his body comp, he's like, well, seeing that I spend 99% of my time with a shirt on, like I'm okay with. And I'm like, dude, that is excellent. That is so true. Like, you are like, not that that's a good measure of who's a really good person, but I mean, like, unless that's your job, like, for real, dude. Like,
yeah, Larry's great.
That was such a great point. Yeah. So I think there is something to spending certain segments of your off season a bit heavier than you would like, and I do think there should be a transitional phase on the way to contest shape. So, for example, this off season I never got quite as heavy. I think the heaviest I ever got was I think I saw 188 at some point. That was it. Last off season I think I saw a few points where I was like 195, 196.
Okay.
right around the time you were competing, Andrea, actually.
Oh, yeah. Did you see that deadlift video I put on Instagram? That's when I was like, oh my God, I remember Bert.
Yeah.
2013, dude. You looked different.
That was big brown right there. Right?
And you were shaved.
Yeah. So yeah, there's something to that, and I think one, like, for sure you're going to be within the ranges of your settling point. Like, for sure, life will be pretty flexible, pretty good.
Yeah.
Your joints are quite cushiony. You have physics on your side when you're lifting weight, which I think to a natural bodybuilder is a little bit more important than we might think.
Okay.
I do think getting stronger is important, and I think even if you don't keep all of that strength, just building confidence in the fact that you can move certain weights is a good thing, and being a bit heavier does that for you. So there's all these perks to that, to letting yourself get a little bit heavier. Plus, and not to mention the one I kind of skipped over, is the fact that to get to that heavier body weight, you had to gain for a longer period. So that's all that time gaining with, like, uninterrupted by mini cuts and such.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, but for example, for me, it wouldn't be too conducive. It wouldn't be good to start a contest prep diet at 190 something pounds if my contest weight is about 160. That is quite a ways away. I mean, everything from how much I'm going to enjoy the diet to how successful it's going to be in regards to, like, body fat, to lean muscle retention, lean body mass retention, and then also, will I make it is a big one, right? If I have that far to go, like, will I make it is a big one, right? So typically, and this is something that I just kind of did my first time going around, like, with myself. I think first time I ever got into shape, I came down from, like, 190 something down to, like, somewhere in the high 150s. And I recall, like, after that was done, I'm like, I never want to do that again. but like, being that strong and big is freaking great. And I love the fact that, I get to have a little bit more balance in my life. I can have that cheeseburger once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times a week.
Yeah.
I'm that sort of stuff. Week. It's great. I'm focused almost solely on training to some extent. And that break is nice. And again, just from a performance aspect, it's wonderful. But I don't want to start my prep there. So what I did is I experimented with a fat loss phase prior to that, got myself down to a reasonable area, somewhere around 8 to 10% above my contest weight. And I kind of did the math there with what is a good rate of loss. And I'm like, you know what, I'll just kind of hang around here or try not to stray too far away from here. And then spend 4 or 5 months doing that, and ran a few specialization cycles since my surplus was going to be a lot smaller. And when you're running a specialization cycle, that just kind of means that you're going to focus on those last few body parts that you're like, you know what, I feel this off season didn't necessarily pick up the spares on those body parts quite as well. We'll run a lat and calf specialization cycle the last few months, and which is, like, always the case for me. And yeah, so I was about the same weight when prep started. It was a lot easier, but I got all the benefits from being heavier, both mental and physical. So yeah, where you are at your heaviest during an off season is perhaps not necessarily where I recommend you start your prep. And I think for a lot of people, that's a lot of planning, and some divisions might not even warrant that.
Yeah.
But I do think for certain divisions where you are expected to come in really, really lean, and that's going to be the bodybuilders, the men's physique athletes, bodybuilders, female and male, and then figure athletes get freaking peeled today. They're bodybuilders with heels. So for those athletes, I would definitely recommend, since you do want to maximize your muscle mass, that you do let yourself get a bit heavier, and because your contest prep also, like, just really depletes your willpower, let yourself get a little bit heavier too for that fact too, so that you can kind of just chill out a little bit and just be away from that for a sec. But upon starting, I do think it's important that we set ourselves up so that we're at a good striking point.
Right. How long of a break do you like to take between your diet before the diet and the actual prep, like the last stretch?
That will depend on the athlete and how long they can kind of live in that. It's minorly restrictive when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's also a great transitional period. I know for me it is, because that way when I start my prep, it's like, oh, I kind of already been doing this. Like I've said no to that second beer a few times already, So I can say no to the first beer at this point, right? So it kind of primes you for that, and you can kind of see your behavior is a little bit more transparent too. Like if you've been goofing up the last 2 weeks, you're like, oh no, I need to do something about that. So it kind of depends on the athlete. You don't want to leave them hanging too much, but it offers that part. That it's a good mental transition. They have to be responsible with this body comp because they know that hey, this is messing with our setup for your actual contest prep. And then you also want enough time too, so that you can run. I would say, at least, and I make my training. I split it up into 8-week blocks typically for athletes. So I would say anywhere between 8 and 16 weeks of just kind of roaming within that range, so that we can make progress on those body parts that perhaps they need a second touch up. Right.
That is something we hadn't talked about yet. We mentioned it in the powerlifting episode we did, or the dual athlete episode that we did, Brad. But how far out do you think you can even see with someone, like, all right, we need to have like Bert said, a specialization cycle? I've actually never heard that term in that way, I guess. But hammer out the lingering things that aren't quite, focus on your weaknesses, all that stuff. Would you have someone do that year round, or would you pick that spot where it's like, this is where now I can see I'm lean enough to where like these things could use some work and we have a little bit of time?
Well, first of all, they work. I think all the powerlifters out there can vouch for this, and I'm sure Brad has experienced this at some point where like maybe you can perform a certain lift because of injury or
when my shoulder was jacked up, my squats and deads went up like crazy.
Insane, right?
Yeah.
Like there's only so much resources to go around, right? Wow, who would have thought, right? When it comes to, I think in general, once you're in the intermediate phase, you kind of can get a firm understanding of what it is that you're lacking. But I think when you're a little bit closer to stage, there might even be some surprises there too. I always think I'm gonna have big arms when I get on stage, and it just never works that way. It never works that way. Usually like the weaker body parts are like the first ones to like piece out on you. So there's something you can perhaps just keep drilling away at the body parts that are just not there or likely to fade away. But sometimes there might be something that you're like, ooh, that's kind of a minor annoyance. Let's go ahead and run a glute-specific training cycle or something, for this last part. So.
Well, and like Bert said, too, a lot of times you don't necessarily know what your true weaknesses on the bodybuilding stage will be until you are somewhat, lean. So, I will certainly... it's kind of like you said in the one episode that, why, if it's not going to hurt the client, what's wrong with programming it?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times if the client does have a lingering annoyance that's like, I have zero traps. What can I do? And I'll say, okay, well, let's go ahead and run a quote unquote, specialization cycle with lots and lots of trap work. Why? Why not? It's not going to hurt them any. Mm-hmm. However, like, Bert was saying, when you do your pre-contest, your diet before the diet, that's kind of the period of time when you can kind of like pick up that little upswing in calories a little bit, fill out a little bit, and then you do kind of find out, because sometimes you don't even know that your weaknesses are actually strengths until you actually get lean. And maybe you lose a little bit of fat around your hip joint and your knee joint. And you realize, oh my gosh, I actually do have good quads, But at the same time, I've discovered that my bicep ties in way down here in my elbow, and I've got no bicep peak. Well, maybe now's a good time to run a specialization cycle and maybe do something specific to arms, and then maybe shift some of the volume around a little bit so that you're taking some away from your legs, which you actually found out are now a strong point because you are leaner, and maybe you can run a specialization cycle on your arms. So I think that you have to be somewhat lean in order to know what type of a specialization cycle you want to run and what body parts that it's targeted at. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's when you really need to design your competition plan. Kind of like these are the plays that we're going to run, during our competition diet. But then also on a separate subject of what Berta was talking about on the subject of the diet versus the diet, I found out this with kind of myself and with some of my other clients that when we do the diet before the diet, it really tests your resolve, because it's kind of like, okay, we've run the diet before the diet, and yes, it was a little bit hard and it was a little bit invasive. You kind of found out that you can't run things in the bro flexible dieting manner. It's gonna get harder. You're gonna have to pay more attention, and you're gonna have to say no to grandma on Thursdays. And so you kind of find out, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to now get freaking dirty and start really, really grinding? And I found out last year, when I cut down from about 177 down to like 166 or whatever it was that I cut down to for my powerlifting meet, it was like, okay, I need to get another 8 to 10 pounds off, and I'm not ready to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is I have a few people on my roster who meant to prep in 2016, and now that is the diet before the diet, because we're going to try to do 2017, because it just didn't go as it. The adherence wasn't there for whatever reason, or life got in the way for whatever reason, and so we might have lost half of what we wanted. We took it and decided, okay, now we're going to eat a little bit for a while, and we'll try to dip again, in 2017. So that's a good point, that it's shows you where you're at. Yeah, that's a good point.
They just found out they're going to have to get a whole lot harder.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to tell y'all that I haven't, or maybe I did. I think I just did this morning. Now I can't remember. Those of y'all listening, I recorded this and the other episode within like a 12-hour time span, so I'm a little confused. But I haven't told y'all in particular, I don't think, that something I've done recently that I've found, and I'm trying to do with a lot of my like OCD athletes who are similar to me, who aren't competing, is I only weigh in on the really good days. Like
Bodyweight.
Yeah, I won't step on a scale unless it's a very normal run-of-the-mill kind of day. So so that means like I step on the scale, like once every 5 to 10 days, and it's the days when like when I say all the stars align, like I ate a normal amount for me, which again on a single training day is like 18 to 2,000 calories. I ate it by about 8 p.m. I slept a full 8 hours, and I woke up between like 9 and 10. If all that shit's in line, I wake up feeling, I'm like, okay, I'll get on the scale, and it's just a way of getting rid of the data points that don't matter, a lot less mental stress. Not that it even like stressed me out, but it's just I got tired. Again, this is like years out into an off season. I don't need to look at weekly averages if I know that my data points between every 5 to 10 days are
very consistent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so if I wake up early, I don't weigh in. If I eat dinner real late, I don't weigh in. If I had my cheeseburger and margarita, I won't weigh in. So it's like now every time I do it, I know it's probably within a half pound of where I'm actually at. And that's been really useful to me, and it's helped I say OCD, not clinically, but OCD like how I am with the details. It helps them to not be so hard on themselves, to not, I don't know, it's easier to report that way, to not see the crazy blips, all that stuff. So I just wanted to share that with y'all. I don't think I had yet. That's been really useful for me and my personality.
Learning to not sweat the details, I think, it's crazy, because we talk about how people need to sweat the details more, but there's a select few out there that it's probably the other way around. It's like, hey, you need this off season so that you don't like worry about weighing 2 pounds heavier than you did yesterday.
Yeah. Or if I didn't take a poop, I won't weigh in. Won't do it. You know what I'm saying? Because I've finally, I do it every day now, and I didn't for a long time. Damn, so much shit was messed up after my last prep. So.
Well, and you can see the exact opposite too. Like I know if I go out, and run around all day with Xander, on a Saturday, playing football, and eat a bunch of, just really sparse food, I'll have a really low weigh-in the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to see those kind of outliers either, because then,
Yeah.
you know, and how many times did we see it on social media? Oh, new low weigh-in. I get to have more calories. It was one day.
Yeah. What
would you have done
too,
if you didn't even see that weight, you know? So
yeah.
I'm kind of like you. I don't like seeing the random outliers the other way either.
Yeah. Well, now what sucks is, which I know that I'm actually in a good mental place as a physique athlete, is because now I'm upset that I'm on average like 2 to 3 pounds lighter than I was before my knee injury, because I'm like, my shorts are getting looser, like my ass is shrinking, and it kind of makes me angry. And I know it's going to come back, you know, but it's still like, this is literally the first time I think in my entire adult life where like I'm seeing 144s for the first time in a year. And I'm like I know exactly why it is, and it just makes me sad. And I'm like, but at the same time, I'm like happy that I'm sad about it, because I know that I'm not forever in a prison of wanting to be lean. So that's cool. So that's another, can we end on ways to, things to chase in the off season besides strength? Because what I think the fallacy is that, all right, so you can't get lean, now chase strength, but that's like, additionally, strength is also slow as shit. Slower for some people. So what are, we talked about how I picked now this new activity that has so many new ways to hit mini PRs. Another benchmark for me, again, was like, oh shit, I'm not pissed that I'm upset that I'm getting lighter for the first time, and that's like a weird light. Well, what are other things that you guys see as off-season victories besides strength gain? For yourself or others?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a good one to ask that, because I'm
you're
so
a power
boring,
lifter.
you know.
Well, and you're a really high level power lifter. So chasing your big three.
I can just kind of, with me, it's kind of like I just approach my training as a job. It's like I need to go to work and I need to log hours, and then every 4 weeks I get to run, you know, basically a strength test or, you know, an AMRAP or whatever. Yeah. And I just kind of compare that way and see my progress that way. And a lot of times I try as best I can to set up goals like that for people, to where like maybe during a deload cycle, one of their weeks of a deload might be like an AMRAP set on all of their exercises. You know, and that way they can kind of see some sort of progress there and know that it's not going to be weekly, at least not for most of the clients that we have. Right. But gosh, you know, outside of that, I wish I was more creative when it came to having those little mini victories, you know, here and there, kind of like you've got.
Another thing too, that I have a couple Gen Pop people on my roster that have expressed, like you said, the like feeling athletic, you know, they need to keep some cardio in for general health and stuff like that, but it's not like we're actively like trying to lose tons of pounds. That we've been able to chase cardio as far as like, how many calories can you burn in 10 minutes on a bike twice a week kind of thing, or because it's not like they're gonna, you know, so just ways of having their cardio be maybe 100 to 200 calories, but instead of it being steady state, go do it, it's like, I want you to record your times, or like AMRAP push-ups for some dudes that want to build their chest sometimes. What else, Bert? What do you got?
Yeah, I was going to say, what about you?
I think when we're deep into a contest prep and once we're done, I think we all have those moments where we're like, I really take that back. I wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And often it's things that relate to trying to bring bodybuilding and trying to have this harmoniously, like run along our real life. So it's a good time, like once you kind of figured out, you're like I think one for me is like, man, I wish I would have played more with my dogs when I was prepping last time. Like sometimes I just didn't have nearly as much energy. I will watch out for that, and in the off season I will make it a good habit to keep up with that and you know, that sort of stuff. So it becomes very clear when you're prepping, and it was there the whole time. That's the thing. When you were in your off season, you probably had issues with that anyways. Yeah. So you work on those things in the off season where it's a lot easier to work on them, make them a habit, and then over time you just have less and less of those blips. You know. You're apologizing to your girlfriend less or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, and then the other one I think is one common theme that we've touched upon many times here is just being able to make the right decisions, with your burger and your margarita. Brad having certain things in his diet that are just it's kind of a baseline diet that's very predictable, and it's working really well for him, and he's seemingly in control. I think we hear the word IIFYMer and flexible dieter, and I don't like to consider myself almost like neither one. I'm not an IIFYMer. I'm not a flexible dieter. I'm an educated dieter, and a lot of that, you make the right decisions, on the fly quite often,
Yeah.
When you're a very educated dieter. And I think it's very hard to actually make that happen when you are contest dieting. You're not going to learn this.
Because you eat weird shit to be full. You eat weird. You do weird things. Yeah.
If you're balanced, you're fat, dude. You're not going to make it. So a good time to learn that is going to be in your off season.
Yeah.
And you will be more balanced once you switch gears and you go into your on season. You will then have picked up a few of those habits. So it's a good time to learn and build up the capacity up here alongside with the strength and muscles.
I think, too, that brought up, a lot of other things that were, tiny life victories. Learning how to travel was a big thing for me without having all my meals packed. I used to literally...
If you 3 weeks out, that would suck.
That would suck.
Yeah.
But in 2012, between my two figure seasons, I was still, taking the ice chest to, go hang out for the weekend. It's bro, it's going to be okay. Things I had another one, too. Oh, with you... eating vegetables, that's something Brandon has to work on, I know a lot of guys that have a lot of carbohydrate intake. They don't want to waste their time with that shit. And then vice versa with me, I literally did not eat grains for 3 years because my macros are so low. And I was like, damn, oatmeal's pretty good, Quest bars Quest bars are pretty convenient, even though those are whatever, gluten-free. But, I can eat at a gas station on a road trip and not, it's little things like that. I always made sure, I might have written it down, but I've been really aware of when those things happen. I'm damn, that's the first time I've done that. Or damn, that, I remember after a season, that's the first time I didn't finish a plate. That's the, and it just builds up more and more and more. It's the first time I didn't, I went to a family thing and didn't gain 5 pounds because I underate until I was at the family thing over and over for months. So I think, I think we cover a lot of good shit in this podcast. Thanks, guys. Anything else?
Welcome.
Anything else? No
No,
extra Instagram.
I gotta eat.
All right. It's food time. Talk to you later. See ya.